All right, welcome back, folks. Welcome back to the channel. Name's Ted. You already know that if you've clicked on the video and if you've clicked on the channel. And we are here with another episode of the TED Talk. And for this one, we're keeping it going, by the way. I promise there's going to be some more players coming back to the channel soon enough. But now we're on a bit of a broadcast talent slash journalist slash people not in the server, but in the server in a different way, Trent. We had Thorin last time around. Now we're bringing in another legend of the game. We're bringing in the voice of Counter-Strike, and it's a really big honor for me to say welcome to Anders. How are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, thank you, Ted, for having me. I'm doing well. I'm excited. To be. I've always wanted to go on a TED Talk, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's some people tell me it's the worst branding ever. I think it's the best branding ever. What's your take on that? What's your take on the name? Should I change the name?
No, I think it's funny. Like, obviously, like the only problem is obviously, in theory, I guess if it grew really big, that could be like an issue. But that's always rebranding. I think it's fine.
Yeah. You know what's the thing? I don't have it registered, and it's not like an official thing or whatever. I just say it's the TED Talk, but it's just something that I put on the screen, and it's a different logo. So, yeah, if they want to put a bullet in their logo, be my guest. I have the rights for that. But yeah, so how we usually do stuff on the show, I'm gonna start it off by just asking what's new in the life of Anders. What is everyday life like right now for you? How are you doing?
I mean, honestly, I'm doing well. I think what's the everyday like? Right now, I'm trying to find like a giant sort of. Trying to rebalance my life because the truth is, for like 12 years, I've basically been trying to make a living on casting Counter-Strike, and that's been working, to varying degrees. And it's been fun and interesting and all the rest of it. But I'm in a point in my life now where I feel like I owe it to myself and probably even more so to my family to try and make sure that there's a little bit more stability and a little bit more sort of predictability in my life. So I'm trying to balance out, how can I find other people to work with in the industry and do like content or, I'm open. I'm looking at a million different things to try and figure out how that works. So I still want to do commentary. I think it's the thing that I love the most. But I can recognize now as well that it'd be nice to have like a bit of another platform. So that's my life right now, to be honest. Like my sort of the thing that I'm looking at every week is just talking to a bunch of different people and figuring out what's available, what's out there, and what do I actually want to do, and all the rest of it. So yeah, it is a very busy time, to be honest.
Okay, in the meantime, in case anyone watching this might not know, can you give us a bit of an update onto what you've been up to in the last couple of weeks? Because you have been doing some more content, you have been streaming a lot more, and you've been introduced to the beautiful world of online tier 2 Counter-Strike as well.
Yeah, true. Yeah. I mean, like obviously, so a lot of the time I've been casting CCT stuff, which I'm super thankful for. Shout out to CCT for hiring me. I think that's been really nice and super helpful. Just where I am now. And yeah, I mean that you're right. That has also given me an introduction to a bunch of teams I probably wouldn't normally look at. But I'm super thankful for that. It's actually a lot more fun than people recognize. So, or maybe than even the previous version of me would have recognized. So that's cool. And then I've been co-streaming some stuff. And when I'm not co-streaming stuff, I'm just streaming, on my own for my own amusement. And sometimes we play Counter-Strike and we throw a ton of weird grenades, theory crafting, and then I upload some of that stuff to a YouTube channel. So that's just another side of. It's a much longer term thing because, as you know, you can't really just build a YouTube or a Twitch channel overnight. Like it just takes a long time. So yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, thankfully you have a superpower that most of us, the others that are trying to do a similar thing, don't have. You can play the piano, which is I think in my eyes is a big flex. But yeah, with that being said, we're gonna roll it back a couple years and just go through the standard proceedings of me getting to know, I guess, the life path and career path of Anders a little bit more. And when I say the life path, I mean before Counter-Strike, because pretty much everyone, and you said it a couple times, knows that you started working as a full-time broadcast talent around 2012, 2013, right? And the information that I found online was that it was right after you finished your major in English. But I want to go. I want to go even further back and ask you, how did you actually fall in love with video games? Because you are a gamer. Like, for people that don't know you are a bit of a nerd about Counter-Strike and some other games, which I think is a cool thing because you've kept up to that part of yourself for your entire life, pretty much.
Yeah. Oh man, how did I? I mean, I was in this. I think I ended up in this incredibly. two, I think, main sources of where I would get like near a desktop PC. Because again, like I come from like an age where that just wasn't a given that you were going to be able to do that. Like not a lot of people had PCs at home or anything like that. One was through a friend of mine. His dad actually worked in a company or owned a company, and they had not Windows PCs, but they had like Macintosh PCs back when they were really
Sure.
called Macintosh and all the rest of it. But those could play like Warcraft 1. So that was like my one of the early introductions was playing Warcraft 1 and then later 2 and then StarCraft. Like, we would do this, and that was like a very random sort of thing that just kind of happened. And then another friend of mine, his dad worked the night shift, and whenever I'd sleep over at his place, he'd put us to bed at like 10, and then he would leave for the night shift. I don't know why they did this. It was probably crazy looking back, but we weren't that old. But basically, he would say like, okay, good night, kids, and then he would leave he would do like I think he worked at like a nightclub or something, basically as a bouncer
Sure.
or some crazy shit. But
Right.
so he would go to the night shift, and then we would like pretend to be asleep, and then when he left, we woke up and we turned on the PC.
And you'd go for the night
And
shift as well.
yeah, we'd do night shift too. And this was like we're talking about pre-Windows, so like DOS, where you had to be able to type the commands out to launch the games and all the rest of it, which we figured out how to do these things. And that was, I don't know. I think when it gets you that early, like you're just going to be hooked for life, So that was like those were like some of my first instances of playing video games in general. I think the first time that I really got just super wrecked by a game was probably playing Diablo 1.
Okay.
And I played that at like a LAN center in Copenhagen, and we were supposed to be home by, I think, 7 or 8 or something in the evening. And I think it was like 11 when I realized how much time had passed. And our parents had like called the police, and they were like, "Where the fuck are these kids?" Because we live like an hour from Copenhagen.
Okay.
We were taking the train there and everything. Like we were supposed to be back much earlier, but I just literally lost completely lost time. Like
Okay.
I've never tried anything like it. Like I sat down to play, never played the game before, and then I was like, I remember the feeling of like playing, and I was like, and then I looked up and I looked out the window and it was pitch black, and I was like, oh, I'm in trouble. Like I'm in a lot of trouble. So that was some of the early stuff and then obviously we, eventually when we were allowed to go back to LAN centers again in Copenhagen, we bumped into Counter-Strike in some insanely early version in 1999. That's probably completely unrecognizable to people who have never seen these early versions. Anything before Counter-Strike 1.0 is, it's a hard look, it's hard to look at.
I know a lot of people used to play Quake before they got into Counter-Strike. Was that the case with you? Because I had a similar chat
Yep.
with Duncan, with Thorin, and Quake has played a massive role in his love for FPS and Counter-Strike in particular. Have you tried Quake, or for you it was just early versions of Counter-Strike and then straight up getting hooked up to that?
No, I mean, yes, we played Quake and we played Unreal Tournament as well. And in terms of FPS games, I mean, back when we were launching things from the DOS prompt, we played Wolfenstein, which I guess counts as a shooting game too. And then we played, Duke Nukem 3D, which I guess had more of like an aim type element, sort of. But yeah, definitely played Quake. I think the style of Quake that I played was obviously like not the kind of Quake that we would see today, right? Like, so I don't think we had like a very good understanding of a lot of the movement stuff. We just thought the game was fun, But yeah, I think those were like the big. I mean, there were a lot of other weird shooting games around back then. Like, I feel like the spectrum of those things was really huge. But nothing, absolutely nothing hit like Counter-Strike. Like I really remember like the first day of playing the game, and I remember the train ride home. So what we do is we would pay. This is like a thing that everyone did back then. You would show up at midnight, and then for 100 krona, which is like whatever, like a little over 10 euros or something.
Yeah.
You could buy an 8-hour pass. So you'd play from midnight to 8 a.m.
Sure.
So you'd show up at midnight at the LAN center, and you'd be like, "Oh, here's 100 kroner," and then you'd sit down to play for 8 hours in a row. And we just basically played Counter-Strike for 8 hours. Sometimes we played Diablo if we got really sick of things, but we played Counter-Strike for like 8 hours in a row. And then, like, I remember the train ride home, like the first time we had done that, like just playing Counter-Strike. And I remember like how it really was like a super surreal feeling of just how like it's all I can think about. Like it's like every moment, every engagement, every little thing that happened. It's very hard to explain, but I think that somehow just like never left. Like that feeling never left somehow.
Could you? It kind of sounds like like love from first sight, doesn't it? Like
Yeah.
you get hooked up to it, you spend the night there, and then the moment you're going back home with the train, because I know the feeling that you're describing, because I had a similar experience myself when I was like, because I got into Counter Strike a little bit later. I think when I was like 10th, 11th grade, I went to the first 1v1 tournament that I've ever been to. It was in a town that needed like a, well, it's quite close, but Bulgarian trains are dog shit. So you needed like 4 hours to get where you would get in like 1 hour with a car. But the way back, you're just looking through the window, and you're like, I literally traveled somewhere to play Counter
Yeah.
Strike. And now I'm just thinking about it, and I feel like a rock star, even though I'm on
Yeah.
the train with that 3.50 euro ticket, and I'm
Yeah.
eating a sandwich that my mom made for me 16 hours ago. I feel like a rock star. Was it a similar feeling back then?
Yeah, I just think I'm trying to remember like we're playing some really weird maps, so it's like it's obviously it's so far from what anyone would
Yeah.
recognize as like Counter Strike like, but this is the weird thing. In spite of the fact that it's just so radically different, somehow the core identity of the game was already established. Like you
Yeah.
already understood like everything. If you took somebody back, like, yeah, it would look funny and people would be laughing and there'd be a lot of like weird quirks about the game that you wouldn't understand. Like, I mean, back in the early days, like you could plant the bomb anywhere on the map. Like you didn't have to go to a bomb site. You could just plant in.
Okay.
You could plant in T spawn if you wanted to. Oh, you just obviously wouldn't win the round, but in
Yeah.
theory you could plant it. Like, and we would, in the beginning we just thought, like, we knew that obviously you planted on a bomb site, you'd win the round, but also sometimes you try to plant it, you just hope that it would blow up a bunch of CTs that were too close by, because they would do damage to the walls and stuff like this. But
Okay.
so in
So you
spite
could
of
win the
all,
round by killing them with the bomb, even though it's not
yeah,
planted on the bomb site.
yeah.
Sick.
So and obviously in spite of all those quirks, like somehow it still had like the Counter Strike identity built into it,
Mm.
and there's something about like the excitement and the anticipation of like every engagement and the feeling of being really good and also being really frustrated when things aren't working out. And I'm gonna be honest, like our understanding of the game was at such an unbelievably low point. Like it's hard to explain like how little the idea of progress or getting better by practicing anything
Yeah.
was non-existent. Like
Yeah.
that wasn't a thing that we did, or I think almost anybody. The most that we did at one point is when people started making frag movies, which you would download off of like File Planet or something. Like it was an enormous task to download a frag movie because they were huge and you didn't have very good internet, so it could be like a multi-day process. Like we had a software that would allow you to re-enable downloads, because if your connection failed, like the download would reset and you lost like 8 hours of download. And the software, at least for me, to re-enable it was called Get Right. Funnily enough.
Okay.
And so, but when we had frag movies, then we could see how like the pros were playing, and we would study those movies. I remember like pausing them and saying like, how the fuck did he shoot the deal? Like how, like, what is he doing? And like, so we would learn from watching frag movies, and then we would slowly appreciate, okay, there are actually better ways to play this game. And and like it's like collecting that information just took such a long time.
Yeah.
If you had even one friend that was like in a team that was better, and you could kind of get some information, you could jump like months ahead of everybody. It really was like the difference between then and now, in terms of like, now we've got people who are stepping up and they could be like 3 months in the game and they could learn like an enormous amount
Yeah.
in no time flat. It's just so crazy that it's possible.
Are you a competitive person? Were you competitive back then when you were playing? Did you
Yeah.
wanna did you see the game and think, I wanna be the best? Was that in your brain?
Yeah, the thing is, unfortunately, I think the unfortunate truth is that some of the people I ended up playing with and also against were so much better that there was almost like a reality check where you kind of almost
Sure.
realize like, okay, I could be good at this game. I'm never gonna be this person. Like that's just not happening. But we played. I mean, we played in online tournaments, which still is something that I think I wish more people would try to do, even if it's a really low level, because the act of signing up to a tournament and having a date in the future where you are going to connect to a server, play against other people who are prepared, and you are prepared, and you have teammates that you've hopefully you have ideas about what you want to do, and you have someone who's an in-game leader, and you trust that person and you try to make it all work. Like that in itself is such a fun and interesting experience. Some of the online tournaments we played in, I played in one tournament. I think the map pool was 21 different maps.
Right.
So the chances of learning all the maps is essentially impossible, which
Yeah.
meant sometimes you just end on a map where you were like, I kind of know the layout maybe, but not really. But I mean, we played at lands too. I went to like 2 or 3 different lands with with my team of we think we finished second or third in one of them. So like we definitely played and we definitely wanted to compete and all the rest of it. I think none of us really had any real dreams ever of sort of making the higher level of play. But
Sure.
there's one person on my team, my friend Hassan. He somehow just had like a really good mind, or like he was really good mechanics for the game somehow, and he was like really sick at it. But like we were never going to become like some like high level team. But I think the competitive aspect of it is still super fun. Like in some ways, I still wish like I could. I could even if it's not never going to be super serious, but I think that there is something really cool about taking the time to sit down and prep for something and then like trying to win, really trying to win. Everyone's trying.
Are you adopting that mindset in your life in general? So when you were a little bit younger, because you say that you are a competitive person, or you find something cool in preparation and putting work into something. Were you like that with other things in your life, like with studying or sport or some other interests, or that was purely Counter Strike?
No, I used to do so many different sports. I think maybe around the same time. I think I did. There was one crazy point in my life which I eventually just couldn't fit all of it into like one schedule, but I did. Like I did basketball and badminton, which I still think is a really great sport. And basketball, I truly didn't appreciate that much, just because for me, like all the rules of basketball made it really boring. Like it's fun to play basketball where you're just playing with friends and it's no rules. But like once you get into like all the rule sets of like how much can you push and move and blah blah, I was like, no, this is too much. But anyway, I played badminton and basketball and boxing.
Okay.
And boxing was twice a week, which is brutal. So I did all these things at once, and yeah, I mean that was super fun. I don't think I ever wanted to be competitive in anything but boxing. That was like the thing that I think was more fun and more like, I think it's also because the feedback in boxing, the difference between being like 10% better than somebody else is insane. Like
Okay.
so like the you feel like you're tracking your progress in a different way as opposed to a lot of the other games. But yeah, but I don't know. The issue that I have is I think a lot of the thing that I am, for better or worse, I think something that I'm good at is more of like is something more that's closer to like a creative or idea driven thing, and that's
Sure.
an insanely hard thing to be competitive or even show if you're good at. Like if 2 people came to me and said, "Hey, we're good at ideas. Let's can you decide who's best?" It's like, man, I don't know. That's very hard to do.
Because it's really subjective, isn't it?
Well, it's subjective, but it's also the case that good ideas with a really bad execution sort of don't go anywhere.
Sure.
And it's also a question of finding the right people, because like most of the time it's not just going to be one person lifting one giant idea. You're going to have to find like a bunch of people and you have to be able to communicate that idea to people as well, and kind of like essentially sell them on it. But you have to sort of transfer your passion onto them so that they care about this idea too. And then like it's a whole complicated thing. It's like in many ways I actually think of it as like the biggest struggle in my life is to try to figure out how can I get to a spot where I have some more resources, whether we're talking money, but even if it's not, like more like people that I know that I can bring ideas to, and then they can either shoot them down, or if they don't shoot them down, we can prototype them, and then we can take them to the next, and we can keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And it's like is very hard, because the truth is most ideas never go anywhere and never make any money and never really become anything. So it's like it's an expensive, super high risk thing to be involved in, but it's unfortunately also the thing that I love the most. Like it like outside of casting, it is like if you get me talking about weird product ideas or ideas for video games or any like kind of random thing, like it's like I really love that. Unfortunately, it's also very like most people who I think who work in this way just end up making no money and like
I mean,
becoming very poor. So
it's the sad part of being a really creative person that always wants to try and create something, right? Because
yeah,
if you dedicate your entire life to it, only a few selected, I don't want to say lucky ones, but maybe fortunate in a way, are gonna come up with
yeah,
something genius enough to fund all the rest of the craziness, right? And
yeah.
then for everyone else is gonna be a bigger struggle. But how does I am interested a lot, and I feel like once, let's say, teenage years or 20s say a lot about them as people and them as
Yeah.
as their character. How does someone that creative as a person end up studying an English major, a major in English or whatever? Like when you went
Well,
to uni, did you think, because at the time, as you pointed out, it was difficult to imagine you were going to do anything full-time esports in gaming, even though you loved it. So
yeah.
was it you going to uni pursuing another career, or was it just trying to buy yourself a bit of a buffer in time to wait for esports to get to the level where you could actually do something there and be a little bit more involved?
No, I never really thought about esports at all as like a career thing at the time. Like I just didn't, I was following it. I was actually watching a lot of, Counter-Strike 1.6 and all the rest of it, Um, and I also watched a lot of StarCraft
Hmm.
and Dota before it became Dota 2 and these kind of things. So like I did always watch a lot of different esports. I never imagined having a career in it really in any way. The thing that I thought if I was going to have something was a career in game development,
Okay.
which is like I think that's the first memory I have of something where I was like, that's what I want to do for like a living or a job was probably game development. But this is in such an early stage where in Denmark, like there were no educations that would allow you to do this. Like it just wasn't a thing. Like you would have to become a coder or an artist and then probably go to another country and
I
then try
think
to
the
do something
Netherlands
there.
was one of the first countries that introduced game development,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And probably even then, and probably quite a bit later than when I was like trying to decide what to do.
Okay.
Um, but so I don't know, like like the sad truth is, I think, is that when I first went to university, I didn't really have any real plan or vision or really much of anything. I picked off what I thought was interesting. So the first thing that I started studying was actually physics.
Okay.
Just because it's a problem solving situation, which I like solving certain problems. Like I think a lot of the creative stuff is just like it's an offshoot of the same thing. If somebody comes to me with a problem, it's the same. Like the theory crafting videos is the same thing. It's
Yeah.
like I'm trying to solve certain problems, and
Yeah.
if I can't find the problem, like I'll try and invent one. But I love it if a pro player, like if anyone ever comes to me and says like, "Oh, we don't know how to do this," I'm like, "Ooh, I'll spend many more hours than I should trying
Yeah.
to solve these problems." And physics for me is sort of a similar thing, um, but ultimately also like I think for a bunch of reasons, I wasn't in a place in my life at that point in time at all where I could anywhere near dedicate the amount of like attention to it. Like there was just a lot of, like physics isn't something you do as like as a thing where you show up and you say, oh, let's see what's going on. I studied a little bit. Like if
Yeah.
you don't
It's
dedicate
either
yourself
your
to it,
entire life or it's nothing.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Like and for me, it became pretty clear. I was like, I can't give this what it deserves, basically. So I'm like, I'm gonna do something else. And then I started studying biology. And then in the meantime, that was really because I started reading books by Richard Dawkins, and I thought it was very interesting,
Yeah.
and I liked the whole evolution thing, and I thought it was very, very fun. But similarly, again, like if you have to be passionate about the whole thing, I think anyway. Maybe you don't, but that was my feeling at the time, and I sort of had a feeling that like I'm passionate about like a really small part of this, and the rest I don't have a lot of patience for. And then I think I picked English after that as like a really again it's sad to say but really it's more of like I've got to do something like
Sure.
so I was like I got to do something and then yeah that's what I ended up doing and I had I gone all the way through with it I probably would have ended up becoming an English teacher somewhere because that's kind of almost the only thing you do with a degree in English is teach other people English almost like a pyramid scheme that's going on there but and I was like I think I was like 6 months away from my finishing my bachelor's in
Okay.
English, and then I bumped into Counter-Strike casting, and then I just quit.
Okay, so how does that happen? Because it kind of, I mean, from my perspective, what it sounds like is like you finally saw something that you like the full package of, right? Because you say
Yeah,
with physics first, it was interesting. Or first, let's start it off with sports. you play a couple different sports. All of them are cool in their own way, but not a single
Yeah.
one of them makes you excited as to devote your entire life to it. Then you go through
Yeah.
physics the same way. It's exciting, but can I really give this the attention it deserves? Probably not. Biology, not as much. English,
Yeah.
I do because I kind of have nothing better to do. And then
Yeah.
because just to clarify, this is not a bad thing, and a lot of people do that in their early 20s, right?
Sure.
You go to uni just to that's why I use the term, use it as a buffer to actually
Yeah.
decide what you want to do with your life. But then not a lot of people actually drop out 6 months before graduating. So
Sure.
that must have been it's a pretty unorthodox decision, right? That must have been a big, okay, I love Counter Strike moment where you're like, okay, you know
Yeah.
what? I'm just gonna send the last couple years down the drain because of that one thing that I love.
Yeah. You know what's it's weird because every time I would stop one of these, educations, like every time I stopped like a physics or biology or whatever it was, or really any time we had time in between a semester at like, English, where like, university, you have like suddenly you have like a month and a half where you're waiting for the next block to start or whatever, and you're just, doing some other thing in the meantime. And whenever these things would happen, I always wanted to like pick up like a bunch of creative things. This is typically where I would say to myself, I'm gonna start learning how to draw things. Like I
Sure.
need to be able to draw sketches of like, big fantasy monsters or like things for like a video game. And I'll do it now, which I think even at the time I understood to be like this was this weird kind of like I'm really grasping to find something that I love.
Sure.
I actually bought my first piano in the same like fury of like I want to I'll learn how to play the piano. And then I played it for like a week and then I stopped playing. But it was like always in between this other thing. I was like I've got to do something. And casting Counter-Strike I think was the same thing. It was like I I'd heard other people cast Counter-Strike. This is in like late 2012, early like first weeks of like
Hmm.
2013. I was listening to like, other people cast Counter-Strike, and I remember thinking, I don't understand why they're never mentioning anything about the grenades. Like I would see people play Inferno,
Okay.
and there would be T's on banana, and they would throw grenades into the B bomb site, and then they would run the other way, and nobody mentioned it. They never said like why are they doing it, and I just remember this is the most absurd thing that I like. And I actually messaged like a couple of those people and I said, guys, like you understand this is what we in the this is what we in the industry sort of like we're
Yeah.
in the community we would call this a fake. They're
Yeah.
faking B and running A, and the whole purpose is to remove the defense as much as they can. And if you guys talk about this, it's going to be really sick. But obviously, I don't know why they would listen to some random Twitter account that's messaging them. None of them did. And then my friends, because I was complaining about this on TeamSpeak or whatever it was back then, and people started telling me like, why don't you stop complaining about it and just do it? Like, if you
Yeah.
think you can do it,
Show
why
them how
don't you
to do
just
it better.
yeah, just
Yeah.
but stop complaining to us at least. And I thought, okay, I'll try and do that. So like, I think my first broadcast was, I think it was on Nuke. I really hope the VOD is not out there. I don't might be, but
Was
it was on Nuke.
that under the Illusion nickname, or was
I
it Anders already?
think it must have been under podcast. I think I just made that channel and said like, this is gonna be it. Maybe it could. I think it might have been. It could have been under Illusion too. Like I'm not actually sure what I used the first time, but
Okay.
but basically I just talked over. There was no play-by-play casting. It's just me
Yeah.
talking about like why are they doing all the things they're doing? Like what does it mean when somebody does this?
Sure.
What are they trying? Even if it doesn't work, what are they trying to accomplish? Because I thought this was the big thing that was missing from the world of casting base. I thought
Sure.
I'm gonna do this. Now I realized at some point that talking casually over like really big clutches, like if someone is like a 1v1 and they get like an insane headshot, then it sounds really weird if you're just like, all laid back, talking about, oh, that's like
Yeah,
a
it's
very
like you're
nice,
broadcasting golf.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think, and also it feels unnatural because it is exciting. So you want to be excited. And then so the play-by-play stuff was like, that happened as a necessity. But the real thing that I wanted to talk about was all the other stuff that nobody mentioned ever.
Sure.
And it's interesting because obviously it's not like I invented talking about tactics. People did this before, but there was a big technological shift in from 1.6 to Go. I don't know how this worked in Source actually. I don't know, but basically the big problem in 1.6 is that we couldn't go from players, 0 through 9 by just clicking 0 through 9. You could only do it by clicking, like, cycling through the whole.
Okay.
You could cycle back and forth, but you could. So if you wanted to get to player number 7, you have to sort of click a bunch of times, and that sounds like it's not a big problem, but it is, because let's say you're going from like player 7, and you go to like player 2, 3, 4. And let's say right as you click like 5, you want to click like you're moving on to number 6, but number 6 dies. Now you're going straight from 5 to 7, and if you think you're going to click 2 more times to get to 7, now you're at 8. So like the swapping back and forth between players in 1.6 from an observer point of view is insane. And the issue with it is that what you end up with is you're just happy to find the action. You're not trying to find all the tactical shit. Like, people knew it existed. Obviously, if you go back and listen, you can listen to. Like, Thorin is back there with Joe Miller and all these other people. Yeah. And Thorin understands the game, and he did back then too. So I'm not claiming that I invented, like the obviously there's a reason I knew this stuff existed too. Like, I mean, like I said, we played in teams and we knew what these things were.
Yeah.
But in Go, we had, we could click things. And in the beginning, I was doing the casting and the observing for like, even for big tournaments. Like, I was just, there were no dedicated observers. So I was just in charge of telling the story that I wanted to tell using the camera that I was, moving around and all the rest of it. And so I think, once that became possible, I think that ended up shifting like the entire narrative for what it meant to do casting, basically. Like, I think that like once I started, doing this, then I think there was no other way to do it from that point on, essentially. And I knew in the first broadcast when I had was like done doing it, like I knew that I was gonna quit like university. I remember like it was literally on day one. I was like, I'm never coming back. Like, and I remember like knowing as well, damn, I have to tell my girlfriend and my family and her family. It's like it's gonna be a mess, like to try and explain like why I'm doing this. But like I just knew like this is it. So.
By the way, there's 2 things. I want to ask about something, but first, I just wanted to put it out there. It's the most Danish thing ever to come out and say, I looked at all the casters and no one was speaking about the grenades. It's like that's something that only a Dane could say, by the way. It's so funny with the context of, Astralis redefining how we used utility years later.
Yeah.
It's just, I guess it's just something that runs in the veins, man. You guys are really interested in utility. I am really curious about how that conversation. Obviously, this is a bit more of a personal one, so it's completely fine if you don't want to go deeper in there. But how did the conversation of quitting the logical pathway into life with university, getting a degree, and potentially getting a job, go with family and, as you pointed out, your girlfriend, her family, and stuff like that? Because in Denmark and in general in the Nordics, it feels like people are a little bit more warm and open to the idea of esports than they were even back in the day. But I feel like the majority of the people that I've had the conversations with were players, and I think it's a little bit different, right? Because for players, they could still say, professional scene existed in 1.6 as well, so we at least have a little bit of a sample size. We have some examples to give. So with you, the fact that you are Danish, you go over there and you're like, I just did that for 1 day. I'm not even native English. Sure, you're studying English, which apparently helped, right? But you're like, I'm not even going to become a player. I'm going to become a commentator, which at the time, even being a player wasn't probably monetarily as solid as it is nowadays. But if we're talking about a caster, it's definitely even worse than being a player.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of different like interesting conversations. So I think my mom's just always been like very supportive. So I think she basically said, "Oh, you can always finish the degree a little bit later." That was her nice way of saying like that's what I recommend that you should probably do, which is probably a good recommendation if we're being honest, And I was like, yeah, and that was probably my way of saying I definitely won't, but
whatever makes you sleep easier at night.
I know. We can all pretend,
Yeah.
And that was fine. That's just how it is, I think for my girlfriend, I remember sort of saying like I have to pursue this no matter what, like, and even to the point where I think even a little bit later on in this whole trajectory, it's hard to explain why, but at this point in time, it was an industry truth that if you wanted to work as an esports like commentator or whatever, you had to move either to Cologne or to Stockholm, because those were the two cities in Europe that had studios that you could work near the studio, and you would that would be your life. You'd travel to the studio, go in and do broadcast, and then leave again. And if you didn't have that, you just weren't going to become it just wasn't possible to do anything. Like
Okay.
the idea of casting from home or having your own Twitter, like that, none of that existed in that way. And I remember telling her like, this might very well be the case that if this keeps going, we're gonna have to move. And she basically was like, she was like, I really don't want to move to Cologne or
Yeah.
Stockholm, like away from, like moving away from her family as well. It's like it's obviously that's a kind of also an insane ask, to say, hey, do you just want to leave everyone and move to like another country?
Especially
for
15 years ago.
Especially 15 years ago. It's
Yeah.
like, for what, And I think I said, I don't think I worded it as like an ultimatum, but I think I said something along the lines of, the problem is that if I don't do this, the version of me that's going to be left isn't going to be a person that's even worth being around. Like I just won't. I'll essentially forever regret it. I'll forever think about this. So like, there's not not to say that if we don't do this, then we might as well break up or anything. But it's like, functionally it'll be the same thing. Like almost.
Sure.
Like I just really felt that way. It's like, and
Yeah.
I know that sounds like almost a little bit deranged.
Oh, it sounds like you want to follow what you love and follow the idea of the person that you want to become, and something that's going to make you happy and not make you feel miserable your entire life. It's obviously a bit of it's a thin line when we're talking about a relationship, but then in the same time, I feel like you made a really good point there, and this is not supposed to become a relationship talk show, by the way, but it's just the things of life, right? And if we're talking about being a creative type of person, the thing that fuels you, the thing that fills you up and makes you whole, is pursuing your urge to create and do what you love, right?
And again, I mean, I'm glad that we didn't actually have to go down that route, and it turned out you didn't actually have to move near a studio or whatever. But it was a very real, like, we really had a lot of those conversations about like, well, what would it look like, and how could we make it work, and could we live like 2 weeks in Stockholm and then kind of travel back, and like this, we had a bunch of those kind of conversations, right? But I think at the end of the day, she actually did say like, if this is what it takes to like for you to follow this, then like we'll have to find a way to like which is kind of cool, I think, and kind of also like interesting. But I mean, that whole first year was all, in terms of like money and everything, was like we're all losing money, right? Like nobody was making any money. Like and she was working, so we were essentially living off of her salary, and I was talking about video games full time, like 20, like how many hours a day, like maybe 16 hours a day or something. Like it's worth pointing out because it's so crazy to think about now. But in the beginning, I was casting like all the European games, and when I say all, I mean there were no European games that were getting played that I wasn't commentating.
Okay.
Because there weren't as many, obviously. Now we have like overlapping games. That wasn't the case back then.
No, you can't do that nowadays with all the CCTs going.
Not possible. and then so I would stay from like 5 till midnight because there's a lot of DDoSing happening and everything else. So we play like 4 or 5 in the afternoon until midnight, and then there would be like an hour break, and then all the NA games would start, and we do all of those too.
Sure.
So we just stay up till like 7 in the morning European time ish, and then we would go to bed, and then and then very quickly, obviously, when I say we, Semler and I were doing it. In the beginning, I was working with like a couple of different people. As one of my friends named Albert in the beginning, but then also like we'd get like pro players in who just kind of joined at random times throughout the day. Or I would do it alone, and then, but obviously once Semler and I kind of connected, it was like such a good situation to just kind of work together. But then we would do all the games all the time. There are no games that we didn't cover, basically, which is insane, especially when you're not getting paid any money for it or anything like that. So just in on the whole, a super crazy thing to try to pursue. But I just I was so happy, and I was just like, I really love doing it, and also I had an insanely strong belief that this game was going to become way bigger than people realized. Because this is the other thing that nobody can, I think, will admit now, but nobody in esports thought Counter-Strike was going to be big like this. They all said, like, I talked to everybody back then, like in any of the big companies, everyone said, no, the future is RTS and MOBA games. Like, look at StarCraft, look at Dota, look at League. Where are the FPS games you're like, because when I start saying, no, you guys don't understand it, they're like, well, point to the other FPS games that are really big right now. there aren't any.
Yeah.
Like it's all dead. And they were like, it's because the future is about these other things. Nobody wants to like play or watch any of this and blah blah blah. And I remember saying, like, you guys you're so wrong. Like it's
Yeah.
gonna you just can't see it, but it will happen. And so I was so sure about it. And obviously, I mean, I couldn't know that the skins thing was going to happen, and then everything. Like, obviously, so I was not like I knew everything that was going to go. I didn't know Valve was going to make a major tournament with all the money and blah blah blah. But I couldn't imagine a world in which it wouldn't. So I also had some trust that like, oh, this is going to work out if I keep doing it, and and all the rest of it. So, but yeah, I remember she told me later that her father I think her father had sort of said something like, are you sure this guy actually knows what he's doing? Like, as in, like, and I actually understand
you
that
can probably
question.
understand what. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like it does sound insane that like, oh,
Yeah.
he's quitting university to do what now? Like,
Yeah.
and you're paying all the bills while he's doing, like, you're saying he's staying up till 7 a.m. talking about video games for like 100 people on.
It kind of
Like,
sounds like
what
what a dad that cares about his daughter would say. To be fair.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense.
It does make sense. It really does. One thing that I actually had a similar conversation. I realized it's a really difficult question to ask, but I had a similar conversation and I asked him the same question with Duncan, with Thorin. I asked him, what is the one thing, if you had to try and name one thing that makes you love Counter-Strike and made you fall in love with Counter-Strike back then and hasn't changed up to today? Like, what is the one thing that makes that creates a spark within you when you think about Counter-Strike? And I'm gonna make it a little bit easier for you if you want. I'm gonna give you a little bit of time to think about it and tell you what Duncan told me. He told me one of his favorite things about Counter-Strike was, first of all, the fact that it requires a massive skill. It's a simple game to understand, but it's so difficult to actually become skilled at it and be masterful.
Yeah.
And the second thing that he told me excited him a lot was all the cool and great storylines that you can make with everything. The fact that you can follow history and the fact that you can make those players and those teams sound like the heroes and gods from ancient Greek or whatever, and you can make incredibly cool concepts with all of that. So
Yes.
with some of that information that I've given you, and I should add a disclaimer, you're not allowed to copy his answer now. What is the one thing that, or what is the thing that makes you love Counter-Strike? What do you love about Counter-Strike the most?
I think I have like probably a longer version to this to answering this, but I would say the thing that makes Counter-Strike like very there's a lot of insane interesting things that spawn from this one fact about the game, which is that it is a team game, right? Like it is, we're playing 5 versus 5, and the best team wins, but also one player can win, like in at any given moment, sort of.
Okay.
And I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but here's the big challenge. I think if I asked you to make a game from scratch where that was the case, I said that this is the only thing I'm asking of you. I'm saying I need you to make a 5-on-5 team game where there's a whole, like, there's a certain team dynamic, like we have to be able to work together, and there's teamwork and communication, all the rest of it. And the idea is that we're supposed to win as a team, but also we need one player to sometimes to be able to defeat 5. Like we should be able to have a situation where it's a 1-on-5 and that one person can win. I know exactly what's going to happen in a game development process here, and that is that if somebody hears that last part, they'll say, "Oh, well, then we need somebody with a bazooka." Or something like that.
Yeah.
Like you would never find the Counter-Strike formula for it, which is
pure skill can do it.
It's so bizarre. It's such a bizarre, like, it's the way in which you can do it in Counter-Strike. Like there's something about that, like that really, and that, because that's possible, you get all these absolutely crazy scenarios that, like, I've watched a lot of Counter-Strike. When I watch, in modern days, if I watch Nico like solve a certain problem on his screen, even though I have some very good, I think, understanding of like what Nico's capable of, I'm still surprised somehow.
Yeah.
Like when I see it in the moment, like, oh my god, I somehow didn't. I obviously knew that technically something like this was possible, but it catches me off guard. And I think that's I think that's derived from this core feeling in the game that it is somehow like all the things, like I know that Nico's teams don't win by just having Nico, but sometimes they do, and like it's like that spectrum of it is so hard. Like again, it doesn't sound like it should be special, but I guarantee you that you couldn't design this from the ground up. Like it would be so unbelievably hard to do.
I mean, even now,
That's a short answer.
I'm trying to compare it to even like traditional sports and think about it, because I think the concept is pretty similar if we want to talk esports, right? Because it's still competitiveness.
Yeah.
Even like the closest comparison I could probably give is basketball, but even there, I'm not the biggest basketball guy. I'm not sure if you can just, if everyone else is having a stinker and let's say Luka Doncic is having the best game of his life, he can still win a game against a good team. I'm not sure if that's how it works, really.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily know either in basketball, right? But it is such a hard requirement to put on something, and is especially because if you do start adding bazookas and all the rest of it, you destroy like all the rest of it. You know, like it stops making sense almost immediately. But obviously, it would in theory it would sort of fulfill the requirement. It just wouldn't. It just somehow wouldn't. You know.
Yeah.
Or it would break some other thing that probably should be one. I would say I have this thing. I can't actually remember if you and I have talked about this in the past, but I'm trying to sort of advance this theory a little bit for how I try to think about the game. I don't know if this model is complete. If somebody can shut it down, then feel free to. I'm happy if people can, because again, like I actually do appreciate when people kill my ideas, because then I don't have to think about them anymore. I can do something else. But if people don't do that, then I keep thinking about them forever.
So you need people to shut you down every now and then, so you don't lose your mind and go absolutely crazy with an abundance of ideas.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's good when that happens. I think that there is such a thing as like I call it like the perfect round of Counter-Strike, and this is a model for how I try to think about the game a lot of the time. Basically, the perfect round is a round in which you get all the information about the enemy team. Let's say you're on the T side. You know where all the CTs are, like what position they're in, what weapons they have, how much health they have. You know everything somehow. And then you pick the perfect plan for that, you know, for what's on the, you know, where they are on the map.
Sure.
If they're all at the A bomb site, you say, oh, we're going to go B. That would be a really good plan, you know? And then you execute that plan really well, which means you actually all go to the B bomb site before the time runs out and all the rest of it. So, like, you execute the plan to perfection. And then once you've done all those things, now you're in a position where you should be able to win whatever mechanical fight happens next. So that they might show up at the B bomb site later, but hopefully now you have like the best possible way to win that fight. Like that's the end outcome of doing all the other steps. Now the beautiful thing about the game is that this round probably never really happens this way. Like that round is never actually played for a lot of obvious reasons. But you can look, I think, at almost any round, and you can figure out when in the process did something go wrong. So, like, one, we're never gonna have all the information, but sometimes you have enough to make, you know, a plan, and hopefully the plan fits somewhat with the information. You certainly hope so. You try and execute the best. Sometimes you miss a smoke, but for the other side, one of the strategies you try to use is you try to move the mechanical element up in the chain. If you can catch someone while they're trying, so if you can push the shooting element right, you know, into the information stage, then you're blocking them from going through the, you know, that sort of list that they want to do.
Right, so you can disturb it, yeah.
And that is so part of the strategy of the game is to try and stop people from going through this thing.
Yeah.
Even whether or not the teams know they're doing it or not, it doesn't matter. And also sometimes a strategy can involve skipping all the steps. So I would say a rush is a call where you say, we're going to deny the enemy team any chance of information. Concept of information, I mean, I have an expanded model in my brain here that involves historical information, which means information you get from studying a team, which then it becomes very complicated. But if we forget about that for a moment, if I rush the B bomb site, the whole point is, if you're trying to go through this flowchart, you can't, because you don't have a plan, you don't have any information. Like I'm basically saying we're going to skip all of this down to like the part execution, part mechanical level. The only difference is I'm in charge of like when that happens. So like I take that away from you. You can't really do it. Like obviously there's some downside to me, which is I also don't have information. So in theory, if you have 5 people at the bomb site, you know, that might be very bad or whatever. But I think you can look at all Counter-Strike rounds and find out. In theory, you could ask the question every time and say, when in this process did things go wrong and why? And I think you'll always be able to answer it through this model. And maybe it breaks down somewhere and somebody can find like a cool way to say no, like this is wrong or whatever. But this is the sort of stuff that I love about Counter-Strike. Like I think this is where the game. I think it's the reason why the game will be played 50 years from now, basically.
Yeah, I actually like the logic. I think where it breaks down is when once you go deeper into, well, I say deeper into higher level of competition, and then you can't neglect the prep factor and the fact that people will know your tendencies. Psychologically, you're going to be reacting in similar ways to if you're
Yeah.
the IGL, to similar things happening in the server, so it becomes readable, and then you need to be aware of your own tendencies and try and counter them, but they might be aware that you're aware of yourself, so it becomes a
And all
whole
so
psychological warfare.
I would, and it does, but I think you can describe all those things by the same metrics, right? So one way that I could deny information to you is I could, I could hide. I could just like sit still somewhere in a corner and say, you don't know that I'm here and you can't see me, so I'm invisible from like an information
Jane was
point
a
of view.
genius all along.
Yeah, exactly. But another way that I could, we could call it anti-information if you wanted to.
Sure.
But like I could show you something that I know you will think is one thing
Okay.
because
Yeah.
I know you've studied, right? So all I can do is I can say, well, I'm pretty sure that if I throw these two smokes, you will think you have a certain piece of information, but you don't.
Yeah.
And then I can, and then like, so for me, like all the same filters used, you're right, it becomes unbelievably complicated. And
Yeah.
if you had to make the flowchart based on that level of Counter-Strike, yeah, it's going to be insane.
But that makes it exciting, doesn't it?
That is, for me, this is exactly why it's so
Yeah.
like, and the problem is actually sometimes we can't explain it good enough, especially on a broadcast. It's very hard to do. But sometimes you see like very small things in a round, and you think. Even sometimes I see like a smoke or a flashbang that lands somewhere, and I think that didn't even do anything. Like there was no one on the other side of the smoke, but I know exactly why. Like you know why they threw it,
Sure.
and it's because they played another round where like they expect certain things, or they hope that someone heard the smoke, and if somebody had heard it but nobody did in that round, but if, in another round if they had, they would have reacted differently. Like there are so many small things like that I think, again, like this is the longevity of the game. Like the shooting part is obviously that's where all the highlights go, and it is cool, and it is ultra cool because you have to remember the pro players have to do all the mechanics and all the other stuff that we just talked about, right?
But that's
but
why
yeah,
you
the
have
other stuff I think
coaches and
is
analysts and all of those
yeah,
people that
yeah,
rarely, well, nowadays they get a lot more credit than before, but yeah.
true, yeah, yeah. But I mean, like there's some real warfare happening in that on that front, right? Like it
Yeah.
really is like a spy game of like trying to figure, like playing that. Like I think it's just it's the coolest thing.
You know what? This is an answer that I like a lot. I would say I think it's a really difficult question. What do you love the most about Counter Strike? But I think
Yeah,
this is a really valid answer. I'm happy with that. So getting back to your career as a caster. Now you did have the pleasure, honor. I'm not sure exactly which. Probably all of the above. To cast the first CS:GO major, and that was back in 2013, right? The dream hack winter. You did that with
yeah,
with Semler. There was some other people like Lerp is there, Duncan was there.
yes,
He was the only analyst there. Some other
yeah,
guys like Tosspot, I think was his
yeah,
name, an excellent nickname by the way.
yeah. I
Uh,
think he was. Yes.
talk to me about what that entire experience was like, because you said you didn't anticipate, because that was the first Valve funded CS:GO event, right? So, and you said that you didn't expect Valve to come in with the big money and actually create majors like that. So what was the entire experience for you? Like what was the feeling of, I'm going to cast the first CS:GO major, like knowing that Valve put the money into it, you go over there, and you meet all the players, you see all the guys that you haven't seen maybe before, and then did everything start feeling a lot more real when that happened?
Um, I think before the event, there was like there was a lot of questions about whether or not we even got to cast that major,
Okay.
because I think when Valve announced all this stuff is when the rest of esports sort of started to say, wait a minute, this is for real, like there's something happening here. And as a result, it wasn't just like Anders and Semler's playground anymore, where you guys can cast whatever you want on Twitch, and like you can do you have fun with this. It was a lot more sort of like, hey, this might actually be a real, like something that's worth investing more time and energy and everything into. And as a result, there was a lot of talk about a lot of different people either coming back from 1.6 or source to like do casting, which we felt like at the time, oh no, that's going to be insanely devastating for us. Like I can't compete with a Joe Miller. like I grew up listening to Joe Miller cast Counter-Strike. So for me, like that was like a damn, like we're gonna get crushed here because
Sure.
like that's just that is. I mean, I think at this point in time, even Joe was like known for League instead from by most people, but not for me. So like so that was a scary thought. I know. I know people were talking about Toby from Dota coming in to
Okay.
do the Counter-Strike thing, and again like his presence in the industry was like so much bigger compared to us. Like who the fuck were we? Like we're just like random people on Twitch, doing talking about Counter-Strike. So there were like all these potential big names, who were out there and that. And we also didn't know anything about like any esports politics, anything. Like we didn't have many connections. I mean, Semler did way more than me because he was part of the whole Good Studio thing with Too Good and all of those people, right? So Semler probably knew a lot more people, like way more people in the industry than I did. But we didn't have the pull with anybody in DreamHack or anywhere else to sort of say you should get out. We were the weird outside people. So that was, I remember that was very. I don't know if we were just being paranoid. Maybe we were, but I remember thinking a lot about this. Like this was the one of the big fears that I had is that basically now people are going to realize how cool this is, and now we're gonna get like or everyone else who has a much bigger brand and bigger history and bigger and many more fans or Twitter followers or whatever the fuck we cared about, they're gonna show up and we're gonna be out basically. But once we got there, I like once it was all like settled and everything else, like I super didn't worry about anything once I was there. I was like just very excited and very like it was just a very cool feeling to be able to do this, right? And to and also work with the people. I mean, I remember maybe the one thing that did worry me is that I had a bunch more than a couple of people who messaged me and told me to be careful about working with Lurpus because he was like a very harsh person, and I should
Sure.
you gotta be careful. And people did the same the first time that I worked with Duncan as well, and they were like, "Oh, you gotta be careful." Blah blah blah. They both, in my opinion, turned out to be absolutely fine and cool to work with. But they had like a real. Like a real
publicly based image, like public created image.
Yeah, as being like people you should be careful with in some sense. And I really still, I mean, I don't know why. Like, I think it was just hype. But
I mean, with I don't know Lurpus, but with Duncan, I can say that I thought the same. And I was last year when I went on Snake and Banter for the first time with him and Maui.
Yeah,
I was a little bit afraid. I was like, you know what? I know if I say something that is out of line or I'm nervous and I say something a little bit stupid, I could see a world in which this person just annihilates me on the show. But then as you get to know him and chat to him a couple times, you realize he's actually a nice guy.
Yeah, and I also have realized something else that I would encourage people to try to think about this in the future. It's very helpful to have people who really will tell you things you don't necessarily want to hear.
Yeah.
Like it's very nice to have people like that you can talk to every once in a while and kind of like get real feedback on. I mean, I remember Lurpus, I think in one of the first like events that I did in, or like some of the early events that I did at this point in time, Lurpus said something to me that was very helpful that I think a lot of other people maybe wouldn't have, like people just wouldn't have bothered because it's, they would have been like, oh, well, we're just all going to be friends or whatever. But he said something to me like, he said, Anders, every time when somebody else is talking on a broadcast, when they're done talking, you say, yeah, that's correct, or yeah, that's right. And then you go on to say the thing that you want to say. And what it sounds like to an audience is that this other person's opinion is only valid if you have basically like said, that's correct, And obviously for me, I was just like a sort of a tick that, I sort of like developed a way to say, yeah, that's, you're 100% right, or like, that's correct. And yeah, or that's a good point or something like that. And then I would go on. And he said, you know what you can do is you can just leave a little break and then you can go on to say something else. Like you don't have to follow even the point up. You can just let it be, let it rest, and then go on to say something else. And I remember thinking like, that's really great. Like that's really great feedback, But obviously, it is a criticism of the thing that I was doing. But if you just take a moment to sort of get past that, it's super helpful. So yeah, I once working the event, I thought it was really exciting and like obviously an insane experience. And there's plenty of drama, especially with NIP losing that final, which was completely unexpected. Like truly, it's hard to explain how. Like I was at. So the tournament that Fnatic had played right before, like they just picked up Pronax, who were playing in like an MSI, beat it in Beijing, and I was like, I had the flu, working literally a one-man broadcast in Beijing. It was at different times, I'm telling you. I had like a massive fever. I was so sick, like doing that whole event.
Okay.
But they just got pro next for that event, and they weren't necessarily that good. And then they came into this one, and they won. Like it's unbelievable. Like still to this day, when I think about it, I'm like, that should have really never happened. It really should have never happened.
If you should like, if you try to compare that upset, because I would imagine at the time I had no clue what what CS:GO was, by the way, but I've seen a lot of I've read some articles about it and I've seen a lot of the videos.
Yeah.
I imagine that was probably one of the biggest shocks that you could experience, seeing NIP actually lose to Fnatic in the final of the major. If you had to try and compare it to another game or another upset in the history of CS:GO after that, could you do that, or you can safely say that this was the most shocking result that you've ever seen?
Damn, I'm trying to think about like what would be on that sort of just like catastrophic level. It actually might be one of the most absurd upsets. Also,
like
because
Cloud9 FaZe, for example, in Boston. Like, does it get close? Like the feeling of it, or even that is far away?
I actually still no, because the other thing is the only team that could even get close to beating NIP at this point in the
Was
history
Very
of the
Games,
game
right?
was Very Games,
Yeah.
and NIP had already beat them in the
Yeah.
semifinals. So at that point, that's it. They've won the tournament at that point. Like
Yeah.
everyone sort of like that was really the feeling. It's like that's it. Very Games are out, and now it's Fnatic that are left, and they've got like who, Pronax and fucking Devilwalk. Like who
Schneider,
who even is
yeah.
who even are these people? Like like Devilwalk was, it's like just a bunch of sort of random people. It's what it felt like. I mean, we knew who we'd seen them play, but no, nothing like Forest and Get Right and Exist, and like it's not even a conversation really. So yeah, honestly, it might be one of the like this is obviously a question for Duncan or somebody like Vendetta.
Yeah.
But I would probably say, for just off the top of my head, I think it actually might be like certainly in terms of like the shock in the community and everything else, like it was crazy.
Because through my eyes, it kind of feels like what the feeling would have been like if, let's say, a Vanguard had beat Astralis in the final of the major that they played. I think it was it was Berlin 2019, and then if ENCE had beat them in Kato, for example, as well. It's like this is the picture I'm trying to paint for it. Had Astralis actually lost those finals with how dominant they were to those teams, I think that is the only thing you can compare it to.
The only other thing that like completes this picture, and like I guess if you're like a balance in the universe kind of thing, is that the major that NIP actually won was also obviously so unexpected. Like that like they were way past like the point where people were like, "Oh, NIP are winning everything." It was like, no, it was like, and it happened on the weird term. Like anyway, that's it's crazy. What a crazy time.
So we talk a little bit about that. From that point on, I guess you can use the overused term "the rest is history" because you did spend the next 12 years working pretty much every single CS:GO major, the first CS2 major. You've worked. I don't know how many events. I counted the majors as 18. I'm pretty sure. I don't know about the other events. I couldn't count so much on Liquipedia. But in general, across this time, I would say, because you are part of the first generation that has dedicated their entire life to being a broadcast talent, right? And in particular, a commentator.
Yeah.
It's a pretty, I guess, difficult question to answer, but what do you think makes the perfect commentator? What are the most important qualities in order to be the best?
There's really, I think, probably is no one answer to this, because the truth is, like, we have this is going to be the most pedantic answer ever, but like we have to define what we mean by best. I think if we define it, say like, what does it take to be the most popular? Because at the end of the day, a lot of it is a big popularity contest, and I think that can be a many different things, right?
Sure.
Like, and it's a flavor that probably changes over time, and like it's good, like for one season of the game, it'll be one kind of thing.
You, what is your image? Because I think it's easier for people to interpret that question in the right way, as if I asked you, what
Yeah.
how when would you feel like you're at your best? Like if
Yeah.
you listen to yourself and you're like, this is my best, this is what I want to sound like. What are the
Yeah.
qualities that would make you that perfect version of yourself in your eyes right now?
Okay. So I've thought a lot about this because I d- I want to try to put together some. I don't know how many episodes, but like I want to put together some list of like videos where basically I try to put down like what do I think Counter-Strike casting is? Like how do I think you could get into it? Like how do you start doing it? What does it sort of mean? And how can we go from like I think of like the very first idea of like how do you establish your own sort of version of being a caster, because you can't necessarily just copy somebody else, but like how do you come up with like what am I supposed to do here? And then all the way through like what I think are a lot of the more technical stuff about how to work a broadcast. And like I kind of want to make a video or a series of videos that goes through a lot of these things. And I think one of the main things that I want people that I think is important, and not everybody does this. Like there are a lot of different it's very sort of like independent, and like there are
Sure.
many other qualities, but the thing that's the most important to me, I would say I would think of it as like having a really strong read of the game. And when I say that, what I mean is something like I think there's two kinds of casting you can do when you're a play-by-play commentator. So one kind is you are there's things happening on your screen and you are reacting to those things. So like big explosions, somebody's getting deagle headshots, somebody's trying to defuse a bomb and there's very little time left, or he's trying to defuse on a Molotov has landed at his feet. And that's you're reacting to that moment right now because that's the thing that's going on your screen. And that can be done to like all kinds of different crazy levels depending on like what kind of person you are and how you use the words and how you build up the moments. Like there are all these different things happening, but I think there's another kind of casting that I would say is like more predictive of what's happening in the future from
Sure.
where we are now. And I think that involves some ability to look at like where are all the pieces on the chessboard right now, and what does that mean for what we're probably going to be seeing in a couple of moments, or maybe even sometimes like 20 seconds into the field. It's very hard obviously to do because the longer we stretch that time, the more mistakes you can make as a caster. But I will also say this: making mistakes is not a problem,
Mm-hmm.
because you can propose sort of a model for what's about to happen and it can turn out differently, and then you can still use that to say, oh damn, remember guys, I said I thought they were going to do this, it actually turns out that this other thing happened, and that's very exciting
Yeah.
because of other like you just have to be okay with being wrong, which you're going to be all the time anyway, so it's not a problem. Like being wrong is not it's not the end of the world. People just have to leave. I know people are going to criticize you on Reddit and say, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Doesn't matter. Just you got to just got to power through that. But I think the huge benefit of doing this is that it if you give people the information that they need to be able to see what's going to happen like 5-10 seconds from now, they are invested into these things completely differently, in my opinion. Like it's a
Okay.
completely different thing.
You're building up the
Um,
anticipation.
yes, and you're telling people what are the factors that go into this. Like why is it important that this thing is happening?
Mm-hmm.
Like an easy example, like if somebody's holding a corner in Counter-Strike and they're just kind of stood there, and I say, oh, this, I could do commentary on this and say, okay, he's holding this corner, waiting for any action. There's only 1 minute left in the round. We'll see what happens next. And like, I can sort of talk over this for almost an infinite amount of time, I think. But if in the background, like one of his teammates has a flashbang in his hand and is ready to throw so they can peek the corner, like if I don't see that as a commentator, it just severely restricts what am I able to do here, Because obviously there's a story he's not holding. I mean, he might be holding the corner, but that's sort of irrelevant to the point. The point is he's waiting, and the thing that we don't know is, are they waiting for a sound cue? Is it timing based? Like, what is
Mm-hmm.
the next thing that's going to trigger this whole situation? That's very exciting to think about, and we can all talk about that, and I can get the list. I can essentially get the viewership in on and say, like, look, guys, we don't know yet, but this is clearly going to happen, and maybe there's nobody on the other side of the wall, in which case the excitement is probably not that high. But let's say they've done it and like that was 10 seconds ago and they're still just holding it, and now people are getting close to the corner, and it's like now we're really building up the
Yeah.
anticipation in a very, very different way. And I think so for me, that is the thing that I probably care about the most. Is like how many things can you spot in a game that will tell you something about what's about to happen. And the hard part about this, in my opinion, is that it does require an insanely high upkeep for a commentator, because the metagame, it changes all the time. There are things happening. There might be a lot of things that you don't know about yet, and like it means you have to talk to players, you got to talk to other commentators, you got to talk to like you've got to try and figure out like what does this even mean? Like why are they doing it? And there have definitely been points in my career where like I've strayed, I think, too far from being up to date with these things, and as a result, I think the casting becomes worse, and that's just is what it is. Like that's probably just the truth. But for me, if I sit down and if I walk away from a broadcast and I feel like this is like I've done a really good job, I really enjoy this, and I'm happy with what I delivered here, it is always tied to this one thing where I have a sense of being able to deliver some of these things so that I can build the excitement about the round and all the rest of it from here on out. That's for me. That's it.
That's a great answer. That is a really good answer. I was expecting something different, but I mean, I say I was expecting something different. In a way, it makes a lot of sense to your entire personality and the things that excite you
Sure.
to give an answer like that. Could you identify one moment in your casting career that is your favorite? Whether it be a game to cast that was incredibly exciting and that you'll remember until the rest of your days, pretty much, or a specific round or a specific hype moment that you just love going back to and saying, you know what, this was this gave me a feeling of sensation, like of adrenaline, a shot of adrenaline that nothing else has.
I mean, I think definitely the sort of the overall comeback for Astralis winning the Atlanta Major against Virtus Pro was obviously completely crazy on train, where they were like really far
Yeah.
behind and they rushed the yard with Tech Nines, and like that was super crazy and the atmosphere was insane. I think that Freiburg clutch on Cobblestone, where I think Freiburg gets like 2 kills and then Exist runs away and they just run out of time. That's like one of the I think the Freiburg "Are you kidding me?" moment. I really remember that because that was one of those moments where like I think I was essentially able to like almost see into the future and kind of like get a sense of like how like that's another moment where like I would say is if you miss the fact that Exist is like making this play that he is like these things all play into it, and like it was just like I could sort of see it all happening like moments before it all played out. So there's definitely a moment there. There's another moment, I can't remember what the tournament was now, but it's Neo clutching on Overpass. I think they make the grand final, like, and he wins like an insane clutch, and that's like I think that's another moment for me where like this is hard to explain. I don't know how this works. Sometimes when if you cast enough Counter Strike, and maybe you just watch enough Counter Strike, actually, and maybe it's not. Actually, I take it back. It's not hard to explain. You guys all know this. When you're watching the game, sometimes you see somebody like peek a corner with a deagle, and somehow just from how he moves that he's going to hit the deagle shot.
Yeah.
Like in a way, you would have to say you couldn't know. How could you? Like, it doesn't make any sense. But like, there's a certain thing where you're like, I don't know, like he just looked focused. I can't see his face, but he looked focused, and there was like a certain like deliberate decision making in every second of this thing. And when you're casting Counter, you get into this like almost flow state where sometimes I just know. I don't know how, but I know he's gonna hit the first shot, and I know he's gonna hit, like you can see it coming, and like those kind of moments for me, like I think that Neo clutch is really one of them for me, where like I had such a clear picture in my head about like how this is gonna play out, and there's probably like a million other ones that I've there must be way too many simple ones to do, but simple is one of the players that can be hard to cast sometimes because like you actually don't know what's going to happen.
All right.
Because you could like your brain couldn't even imagine that some of those rounds could even be won, right? So it's like you might not even, you're like it's lost, like obviously lost, and then it's just not. Shout out to Simple. I miss him a lot.
Shout out to Simple one time. I think a
Yeah.
lot of us miss him. Every now and then, because I don't read Reddit and I don't read forums and I don't spend too much time on Twitter reading comments, I see some people, I hear some colleagues saying that people are actually shitting on Simple and they want him to retire and not come back, and I'm like, who the hell would want Simple not to come back? Like, It doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense. He's the
I've started
greatest to ever do it.
I've started taking a slightly different approach to the simple conversation. Like I think I'm gonna be in the future. I'll try to be a little bit more militant about this
Okay.
because it does trigger me when people say that, you know, be like, oh, like was he really the greatest, or like was he really the GOAT of CS:GO or something? I'm like, guys, you like if you have to ask that question, I'm gonna give you the benefit of the doubt and say you just weren't there.
Yeah.
You could train like the most hardcore like aim person ever to solve aim related problems, but the thing is, like, there are going to be things that just aren't in that textbook that simple will find, where it's like even the most like the best professor at the best, you know, Counter-Strike university who's written all the textbooks, they're going to be like, wow, like that thing that you just did was in none of them. He
Yeah.
just invented that on the spot, and now like, you know, like that was just brand new Counter-Strike theory, or that was like a brand new way to play the game, that he just did that. And like it's just so insane. And we've had very many good players, but like there's only really ever been one simple, I think. So like it's just the conversation to me is honestly, it's just is a bit absurd, you know. I'm happy to have more conversations about, like, because I think you could make another statement, which would be something like, who's the best player you'd actually want in like a team of 5 people? Because again, it's a team game, right? And that's not always going to be simple,
I
because
mean,
then you've got somebody like a
you can
device,
make
you
a
know.
device Astralis era point
Yes,
there, right? But
of
if we're
course.
talking the GOAT, like the guy
Yes.
that would break the game and that would make everyone lose their mind and make it impossible for people to predict what is going to happen,
Yes.
there isn't another simple. I completely agree.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like in the other conversation, yeah, device is going to be an instant, you know, an instant classic, right? And you know, but yeah, there's not been anyone like that. And yeah, I'm starting to I feel like there's way too much waffling around on this topic, where people start saying like, yeah, but what about? It's like,
People are
if we're
just
talking about,
scratching their tongues, and it's
yeah,
unnecessary, especially when it comes down to simple. There's a lot more opers in the world that deserve being criticized, and you can make a point.
yeah,
Ultimate.
yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, we're gonna keep it going with another, I think,
Go on.
really important chapter of your career. And I know this is across different time periods, but I'm just interested in first of all the reason for all of that, and second of all a little bit of detailed story, because I don't know too much about the first thing that I'm gonna mention. So across your entire career as a broadcast talent, you've shown a tendency to like creating other, or maybe not entirely different businesses, but just creating something and not just being a broadcast talent. So you did, first of all, something that we missed out on to say. You were a part of NIP TV, right? That was
True. Yeah.
that was how you got into being a commentator in CS:GO. But after that, you and
Yeah.
Semler left, and you created On Fire. And
Yeah.
then after that, because On Fire existed for, correct me if I'm wrong, around 6 years, 5 years, something like that, up until 4 years actually, 2014, 2018, right? So
Sounds about right. Yeah. Something like that.
and after that, you created Skybox, which is still something that you're working on. So,
Yeah.
across your career, you've always tried to make something else. So, I want to start a conversation from On Fire. So, what was the main purpose with all of that? Because I'm pretty sure back in the day, everyone knew it, and your Twitter handle was still On Fire Anders, right? But I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
nowadays
Yeah.
a lot of people don't really know what On Fire actually
True.
stood for and what
Probably.
it meant.
Yeah. What was the goal? I mean, it was sort of meant to be a couple of different things, right? And maybe that was part of the problem, is that it wasn't like like clearly enough defined from the start, right? But in
Okay.
theory, we wanted to get like all the casters and analysts and everybody kind of into one space, and then we could, you know, essentially create sort of broadcasting packages for different broadcasters, and sort of say like, hey, we've got these people, sort of like an agency, but not really in that sense. Like some mix between, let's call it like a union and an agency, or something
Sure.
like that. To sort of to try to essentially improve the scene from like a talent point of view. Because like Semler and I fought a lot of crazy fights at the beginning of of this part of esports. Like when Semler and I did events in the beginning, we were all sleeping in like the same hotel room. Like Semler and I were like, you know, essentially sharing a bed, kind of. And that was a fight to take, to say, no, guys, like if one of us gets sick, or if somebody is suffering from insomnia, or somebody's girlfriend calls them in the middle of the night or whatever it is. Like it can't be the case that both people are going to get wrecked behind this. It's not okay. We need to be able to, for the sake of the broadcast, even at least that's the argument we used. I mean, also for our mental health point of view, it's like it's nice to have a space you can go in and close the door and say, it's just me. But we try to sort of say, listen, for the sake of the broadcast, like let's not risk so much. So that became a thing, right? That didn't happen before. Like before, it was as many people as you could into like one room, basically. And then we had to go through a bunch of fights to try and increase the day rate because you know, like that just had to. I felt like that had to happen over time. Um, and and I mean, there are probably a million other areas in which you could say it would be good if there were at least goals that you could get to. It might be super hard to talk about how do we get there because these aren't like demands you can just make, right? Like it's not you can just call a tournament organizer and say we want this, and otherwise the thing is we're going to get angry or something like it's a conversation, right? Like they have a reality too, right? They're running a company and they're doing insanely hard work. I mean, I know
Sure.
I've seen it up close, like the insane infrastructure and like logistics that it takes to run a tournament in some other country, like putting all your broadcasting equipment on a container ship and shipping it somewhere. Like it's absolutely wild that this thing even works, right? So it's not a question of like the TOs are so evil and we demand only one like person per hotel room and more money for the car. Like it's not really about that. Even though I think at the time we were very immature about this whole thing. But in a way, part of the goal here was to try and sort of build a better version of all of this for obviously for Samurai and I, but also for like just for sort of a broader population. And then also to do content and also like like that. I mean, we thought about this as like a thing that we could sort of sell to the TOs too, right? So we could show
Sure.
up and say, hey, we've got like a podcast with these people, and that we can figure it out, and we can do all these things. That was sort of roughly the project, right? But at the end of the day, our let's say our understanding of what it might take to actually make that project work was probably really bad, in my opinion. Even though I think I mean, we got a bunch of people into the industry and did a bunch of cool stuff. So like, I don't regret any of it, um, but yeah, man, we would have had to put a lot of hours into, I think, into really cementing this idea. And I think anyway now, it probably looking back now, when I think about like the level of maturity of everybody in the scene, I would say, we probably just was too early to do it anyway. So
Okay.
yeah.
Do you think, because you say it was too early to do it back then, do you think that something like that would be useful now for the space and do you think there would be a purpose to create something like that to, I guess, strengthen up the bond, the communication between broadcast talent, establish some type of a, I don't want to say rule book necessarily, but establish some type of a mini community that is fighting for the same goal almost?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is self-evidently yes, but the hard part is always going to be figuring out like how do we draw the lines and how do we make rational, not demands, but how do we have rational conversations with these different organizations, because there are so many ways to fuck this up instantly, like
Sure.
both between the broadcast members, like the talent people that are working together, like people are going to be it's not going to be an easy conversation. And obviously it's very easy for that kind of group to go to a tournament organizer and basically ask ridiculous things and just be it'll go nowhere basically.
Yeah.
um but I mean there is, I think there's some I've been trying to figure this out for like the last 3 months, I think, in my head. And one of the big issues is, I think you could, maybe if you were really cynical, you could make an argument. I think a lot of people could make this argument. You could say, why the fuck is anybody owed a position as like a Counter-Strike caster? Like, shouldn't you, like, does Valve owe it? Do the tournament organizers owe you like anything? Shouldn't you just be happy to do the thing when you're doing it, and then that's it? And maybe that is one, sort of, that maybe that's one way to think about it. That essentially everybody's replaceable, and it just doesn't really matter, you know. And if somebody leaves and somebody quits and somebody wants to do something else, then we'll just replace that person with somebody else, and that's it. Maybe you could probably make a decent argument for something like that. But there's a part of me that thinks, damn, like some of these people that are around. I mean, obviously, obviously, I'm thinking about myself, but there's a lot of people who have been around for a long time. And the question sort of is, what happens? What happens in the future if there is, you know, if there's sort of nobody who's fighting for the longevity of this part of the industry, you know? Like the teams are fighting to build better organizations, and the players are fighting to, you know, get better stuff for the players, and tournaments are building, you know, like the salespeople and the media, right? Like there's a million things that they're doing to push things forward, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And they really have. And the question sort of becomes, well, what about the other side of all of this? And I definitely have a fear that the kind of what I think of as like a very vibrant environment that existed in the past, where there's a ton of competition. Like, you know, trust me, when Semler and I were like functionally unbeatable at one point in time, right? And then when teddcs and Henry started showing up, and they, you know, in the beginning you're like, yeah, okay, like, but you know, they're not like, you know, who even are they? You know, who even cares, right? And then like from event to event, they get better, and people start to notice, and you're like, oh, oh shit, you know. And then they get really better, and then the community all starts saying, yeah, we're also a little bit tired of fucking Semler and Anders, right? And why don't like these other guys? They're probably better, and we like them more, and they haven't really had a chance to do anything. Like,
Yeah.
you know, you can see the tide turning against you, and you think, holy shit, this is, you know, bad news. But it wasn't bad news. Like, it was really good for the game, because teddcs and Henry brought a lot to, you know, our little space. And
Yeah.
the fact is, if Semler and I could have been the kings of like CSGO forever, that would have meant CSGO would have probably been a failure as like a game. Like, if it can be controlled by like two people at the top and that's it, like what like that. That says this means you're the king of like a really small little hill somewhere,
Yeah.
you know. And I thought about this then. Like I thought, because the truth is, when you are in the position that we were in, you have a lot of power to shut everybody else down if you want to. Like, you can do a million things to fuck with people as they're coming through the system, right? Way before they even know anything about the politics or anything, right? You can, and this has happened a lot in other esports. No, any names, but
we're not
this is a
we're not gonna say specifics, but
I would almost say this is esports like esports practice to like, it's almost like the industry
sure.
standard in many places. But I very specifically remember thinking, I actually would rather fight hard to just try to be the best. And also, and if somebody beats me at this, then like they deserve that in some way. And then also, like, I also will never really know if I'm good or not if I just try to keep everyone else out. You know, like I can't know if I'm even good at what I'm doing any longer if I just, you know. So I think a lot of the super exciting and like vibrant, like all these people that we got through, and it's like that's sort of in part is because we had this, like, I think what I consider like a very, you know, open system where there was like a lot of, you know, a lot of push to try to essentially move things, you know, forward into a brighter
Mm-hmm.
future. And sometimes I do sort of worry about the fact that it does feel like now, and maybe it's just because the space as a whole, like Counter-Strike obviously right now is like, you know, now we got the whole VRS stuff, but also like the whole world economy is kind of in a weird spot, and there's a million things happening. It feels like there's a bigger sort of contraction, and it's making everybody unbelievably nervous. Like, so I feel like that same sort of world doesn't seem to exist anymore, and that has me worried, because for better or worse, like, I'm kind of in this Counter-Strike stuff for the longevity of it. Like, I think what we do now in terms of how we build tournaments and teams and how we treat players and how we treat, you know, casters and analysts and hosts, and even how we treat fans to some extent, like these things, the choices we make now will matter in like 10 or 20 years. Like, we're still laying the foundation for all those things. I think it's important we do it the right way. And it's, I don't claim to know what the right way is, but there's definitely, I think, some signs that I would say that there's some trouble brewing in the future for some of these things, and that's a shame, you know.
I think that leads really nicely into probably I think one of the last topics that I want us to discuss, because I just realized it's already been an hour and a half, and I can sit here and talk for 5 hours, but I don't want to make you stay
We
here
could
up
do an
until
episode 2,
2 a.m. Yeah,
Could do
yeah,
an episode 2.
we definitely could, but maybe not now because it's already 11:30 for you and it's midnight for me. But uh, I wanted to talk a little bit about the VRS and how that changes life for, because there's been a lot of conversations about players, and I think
Yeah,
obviously it's the most important part of it all because the game is about the players, and then
sure. Yeah,
as
no
important
doubt.
the broadcast talents are, it's a little bit more secondary to a lot of people. But I think the player
Should be.
conversation has been, yeah, and I think the player conversation has been led into and squeezed in a lot more from different people. And obviously it's not easy for everyone, but I want to get your perspective on the broadcast talent actually side of things
Yeah.
with the VRS, and how work changes, and how uh casting opportunities change for people. So what has been your experience so far with all of those changes, and what has the VRS changed for Anders in particular?
I mean, I would say, man, I'm usually the issue is I'm not sure this is even something that Valve can be made or should be made, or maybe you could just this is like a non-Valve problem basically, because I don't know how Valve would take ownership over this part of the industry, to be honest. And it would probably be a nightmare if they did, to be honest. Like it could be, but I'm usually like I'm a pretty big Valve supporter in the sense that I feel like I'm always the one out there in the community saying, yo guys, like Valve know what they're doing, calm down or whatever.
Sure.
Even though sometimes I still lay awake at night and think like, do they know what they're like? But I do have a lot of faith in them. The VR stuff has blown an enormous hole in like a lot of the economy of people who work in this space for the beginning of the year, and maybe even for the rest of the year. And I don't know about like 26 yet. I haven't really looked that far into the future. But obviously, a bunch of the tournaments that were meant to be happening, just because they weren't complying properly with the VRS stuff, just got nuked, right? Now, that's not Valve's fault. I guess they published the rules and people just didn't know how to follow them. So it is what it is. But that's a big deal. The other big deal is in the past, right? We would have had a lot more tournaments show up where some betting company or skin company or other would have said, "Hey, we'll drop in $250,000 or $500,000 to do like an event that's like a week long or 10 days long online. We have the money to do it. We're going to do it." And then and those kind of events typically they typically pay a little bit better than all the other stuff, but for obvious reasons, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got suddenly 10 days of work, which is it's a lot. It's hard to find 10 days of work, to be honest, for everybody. Now that those events they can't happen anymore, right? Because I mean they can, but they're just not going to be VRS events, so nobody will play in them. No matter almost how much money you throw in. I mean, I guess if you made like a $10 million event, then sure, but like that's you're never going to recoup that loss, right? And honestly, that it sucks for people who work in the industry a lot that's not happening. But I can understand it's also a good thing long term,
Okay.
because on the other side of things, if I am a tournament organizer who scheduled my event and announced it and complied with the rules, and I invited teams and I did all this stuff, and I've invested like time and energy and money into saying, hey, this week in the year, that's ours, and that's where we do this thing. If somebody just shows up and says, LOL, I have $1 million and I'm just going to destroy your viewership because I can, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now we just suddenly have the 4 best teams of the world playing in like a triple elimination bracket, and like everyone's just watching Spirit and Navi play, all week, and your tournament is just, there's nobody like that doesn't seem like that could be a good thing for the space, right?
Sure.
So I understand what they're going for, and maybe this problem is a temporary one, and when reality catches up for everybody, then we'll have these tournaments come back and announce themselves into the future. Like that, hopefully something like that will be the case, so that there is essentially just more work to go around. But right now it's super devastating, and I've talked to a bunch of people recently about this stuff, and unfortunately there are many people out there who are sort of looking around saying, damn, like wasn't this supposed to be the year of all the work, you know?
Yeah.
And then it just isn't. So yeah, it's super hard, unfortunately, um, and again, you can always return to that same question, which is anybody really owed a job as a commentator in this
Okay.
space? And I think that's a really hard question to answer. Like I don't know how we solve that problem, but I, like I said, I do feel like some people have given a lot to try to build up this particular space, and it does sort of feel like there's some collective failure to like to sort of to I don't want to say build a safety net, because that's not really what we're talking about here, but there's something that's kind of missing from the space at the moment. That's I feel like in the past esports was better at handling.
Okay.
Like there was. Be careful what I say. I guess, but like I would say there was more of an esports community feeling at some point, which I
Sure.
feel like now there is much less of that kind of feeling. Now it's much more like each person to themselves. That's it. Like you just do your own thing, and that again, I think it's more of a side effect of how stressed people actually are than the fact that people are now suddenly don't care about each other. But stress will make people do a lot of things, and not always for the best.
I think we can leave that type of the conversation at that, because
Yeah.
as you said, it's a bit of a gray one. But I want to finish off on a topic that is more connected to what we love, and that is Counter Strike. Now, one of the upsides of being introduced to CCT Hell is what I love
Yes.
calling it, is the fact that you get to actually lay your eyes on some of the upcoming fellas in the space, right? So now you're gonna start realizing how, for example, me and all the other guys like Neo you've been working a lot with recently felt
Yeah.
like when Flammas got introduced to Gamer Legion and everyone lost their minds onto where this kid is coming from, and we knew who he was for 2 years
Yeah.
already. And there's a lot of examples like that. So from the couple
Oh
months
yeah.
that you've spent now enjoying a lot of Tier 2 Counter Strike, which has been your favorite part about it? And has there been any people in particular, whether it be teams or players or whatever, that you've really enjoyed watching and you're thinking and you're watching and you're like, I know those guys or this guy is gonna make it into tier 1 and I'm gonna be so happy telling people I knew about him such a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, right, like there are so many players right now
Yeah.
in the space that just have like an enormous amount of green flags, where it's like you can just see like, oh, they're doing so many things right. They're so sharp. They keep showing up. They keep doing it. The big thing that we're obviously never going to know, or at least I won't know necessarily, is like, what about the personality side of things? Like, it's going to be hard for us to figure out. But yeah, there's really is an abundance of people where I'm like, damn, it's too much, like there are so many of them. I have a certain weakness for a particular kind of AWP player that,
Okay.
like, so when I played, just going way back to the start of the
Yeah.
conversation, when I played the AWP role. So like I think
Right.
I'm just always going to have like a certain feeling about that. And all my favorite players in some sense, like people like Simple and Fallen, like there's a style of AWPing that I just think is so sick, and like is so exciting. And right now there's actually a guy on Gun 5 or Guns, depending on how you want to say it, called Fine Shine,
Okay.
Fine Shine 52.
Yeah.
That I feel like I see some signs in him where I'm like, damn, this is just so wild. The problem is that style of AWPing is also the one that is, in many ways, the easiest to punish,
Yeah.
unless you happen to be the 1% of the 1% that can do it, even if you play to punish it, right? Which is, I don't know, it's like winning the lottery twice. To be like to play that kind of content to begin with is very hard to do, but like to do it when your enemy knows you're doing it and they're like a tier 1 team and they know all the protocols shutting you down, it's very hard to play through. So whether or not Feinstein could make it into like tier 1 and continue to be that person, like just from stats alone, I'd have to say no. But like, if I'm wrong about that and he can like have the same mentality and and not get shut down by all the madness that's coming his way if he really does end up playing, a Vitality or something like that, then yeah, like he's a really fun player to watch right now, I think. But the truth is, like, I mean, in terms of a team as a whole, I think the Navi Junior team is insanely fun to watch.
Sure.
I think they're so much more skilled than they should be. Like and it's in every, like, there are many mistakes too, but there are way more exciting things in the overall approach to the game, like the understanding of knowing, I think, when to play, fast, but also when to kind of slow down the game a little bit. Like, yeah, tactical depth could be even bigger, and there could be like other, like other aspects that could be added. But like on the whole, they're just a lot of fun, and the individual players on that team, like Makaze and Demon, but even beyond that, like I think even like
Yeah.
someone like Krabani, I think who's the IGL for them, right? Even he individually as as if you just look at his mechanics, is crazy. Like there are too many of them basically, and I mean I would say on the Oh, I'm blanking on the. Oh, it's the Nemiga with which obviously with Sway
Yeah.
that people kind of know. But I would say Khan, the other guy on that team, I think is really sick. I think Khan is like he's kind of, I don't know. The conversation became about Sway a lot, and it's fine. But I think Khan is the other player on that team that I think is really exciting. So yeah, like the truth is, there are almost too many of them to
Yeah.
like to hire, and that actually becomes an interesting kind of problem, because you're like, damn, like how many of them though could get there, probably a lot.
I guess
Yeah,
it makes it
it's
more
fun.
interesting as well, right? Because when someone, because a lot of people are gonna get the chance, but when
Yeah,
someone sticks, that's where you're like, this guy is special. It's
yeah,
all about finding the special ones between the, let's say, 50 people in the tier 2 space that you're looking at, and you're saying this guy could actually be a good tier 1 player, and then there's
and
only maybe 5 of them that could actually have a long career in tier 1.
it's also it's also true that the challenges you're going to face if you're one of these people is like it comes in different stages, right?
Yeah.
It's very different playing like CCT against people where, like, your belief that you're going to beat the other people on the other side might be like at 100% almost at all times, because you just have, like, if you're a certain kind of player, like I think a lot of current players are like this, and they should be like this. You It's not that you have no respect, but in a way, like, you
You just
certainly won't
believe that
play.
you're much better. You're like, they're nothing
Yes,
special.
yes, you just
Yeah.
have this feeling inside you're like, I'm like, it just doesn't matter, like I'm going to
Yeah.
win all, and that's great. You should feel that way. I like that. I think it's really important. But then holding on to that feeling when you look at the scoreboard and it's Robs or somebody else on the other side is going to be hard. That is really
Yeah.
hard to do. Yeah, it just is. And then, but at least in that moment, you probably have the advantage that Robs has no fucking idea who you are, hopefully, and and might just sort of say, like, we're probably gonna win anyway.
Yeah.
But the first time you get close, or you do, or there's enough news about it, or you're making enough waves or whatever, and they actually sit down to look at how you play, you will then be faced with like a different level of Counter Strike, where like the kind of, like, yeah, like you're now in this weird prison where it's like a bunch of the moves that you're trying to make are already getting denied to you. You're not even moving around the map in the way that you used to, because like there's a ton of stuff happening, and a lot of the cool moves that you thought were going to work, like, just, there's like, it's just not going to work the same way. And again, like, living through that and adjusting your ego to deal with that, and having other people who are, as a coach or somebody else, tell you, hey, listen, you're going to have to stop doing something. I know this worked really well throughout the first 2 years of your career, but now you just have to retire doing these things, because it just doesn't work anymore. Like, all of those things are very hard. Like, it's an insanely hard ask for somebody, and that's why so few people make it. Because like it's not just about like shooting well. It's a whole combination of making it through all these different filters and still being good at the end. Yeah, super super tricky.
I think this is a really good conversation to end it with. I would have loved to actually chat even more about it, but as you said, we can save some of the thoughts, because there's,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie to you, I have a document on my second monitor with topics that I had listed. I was like, you know what, we can discuss those. I want us to get through those. We're halfway through. That's all I'm gonna say.
Nice.
And we're
Let's go.
1 hour 45 minutes. So the other half I'm gonna save up for another time. I wanted
I'm
to
down.
thank you very much for coming over. It was a really pleasant conversation, and I like the fact that we were able to talk about really different topics and jump from one thing to the other. I think it's gonna make it an interesting watch and listen to a lot of people. So yeah, it was an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you to everyone for watching. Of course, all of Anders' socials are going to be down below. YouTube channel, Twitch. You can catch him streaming there. You can catch him uploading videos about new Mirage grenades somehow on the B-bomb
Yes.
side. I haven't watched that yet, by the way. I'm gonna do that before bed now because I'm really interested to see if there's gonna be something that is not actually useless in the video. If there is,
Yeah.
if there is, I will be incredibly excited.
Let's go.
Yeah, massive shout out. Thank you for coming over. It was a great conversation, and to everyone go and check out Anders because he is an absolute legend of the game, and some of the content that he pulls out that he puts out is really worth the watch. So yeah, thank you for coming over. It was a really good one, and to everyone for thank you for watching. Leave me a comment below with some other ideas of people that you might want me to talk to, whether it be broadcast talents or players or analysts or coaches. I will go back to the coaching / analyst angle soon because I haven't done it in a bit, and I think those people were really interesting to talk to as well. So yeah, you can expect that as well. Although now I realize how big of a liar I am. The next video I'm uploading is actually going to be with another broadcast talent, but after that I'm going to pause it for a little while. I promise, guys. Okay, thank you for watching. Have a good night, or have a good day, or whatever, and bye bye. We'll see you soon again. Peace.